At the end of 2016 and the end of the last season of the Wacky World of MultimediaJay, I left the Dellasaurus Club. But the story didn't end there. Sure, this old Dell Dimension L566CX, originally powered by a Celeron and originally made for Windows Millennium Edition, had gotten to the point where it wasn't worth working with anymore because the hardware was just too old. But the case sits silently, waiting for me to solve its mechanical problems, so a motherboard can actually be mounted in this thing again. Until next time, or until that happens, I should say, it's a doorstop. However, the Dellasaurus story did not end there. I've been hearing about Sandy Bridge Dellasauruses and refurbished corporate machines making their way around various YouTubers' channels over the last few months. And eventually, my curiosities got the better of me. That's right, folks. There's a new Dellasaurus in town.
The Wacky World of MultimediaJay.
And this is what we have to play with. The Dell Optiplex 990 Business Tower. Decommissioned corporate machine, basically, powered by an Intel Core i7-2600, squarely from the Sandy Bridge era. According to the service tag, it was manufactured May of 2011. I've already taken some liberties with some electrical tape for various, covering up various labels and stuff, so that it all is one color and stuff like that, and there's a license key and things along those lines, but basically what we have here is a refurbished corporate tower, not unlike Greenham's incredible i5 Dell that I've seen floating around. And basically there's a lot of folks that are like, oh look, here's how you get a budget gaming system. Buy a decommissioned corporate tower and put a graphics card in it. Well, here we go. The interesting thing about these videos that I've been seeing on YouTube is that just about all of them are the Core i5 version of this tower, the i5-2400. I very rarely see anything else if anybody is trying to make a Sandy Bridge sing and dance in this day and age. So I went specifically looking for the i7. The i7s are a little bit harder to find because I don't think they were anywhere near as popular as the i5s and the i3s. So but that's what we have, which also means that this thing has hyper-threading, which technically makes it a distant ancestor, so to speak, of the Skylake chip that powers Monolith. So this is basically Monolith, except it's going gray. So, as you can probably imagine, this is a Greenham parody waiting to happen. But we're not going to do that this go around. We're going to do some testing. This thing is still full stock, so it still only has 4 gigs of RAM, and it still only has... well, no, it has no graphics card, basically. This is basically the way it came from the Refurbisher, which this go-round is, of course, Think Green PC. I've been keeping an eye on the stuff they sell. They tend to, they're based out of Kentucky. They work with Newegg, and I picked this up through the Newegg Marketplace, through Newegg Business. Oddly enough, this SKU was nowhere to be found on regular Newegg. I saw it a couple of weeks ago, but now it's Newegg Business only. So I had to basically put myself in like I was running a proprietorship or something like that. Company name NA, put myself in as a systems integrator for a small company with 1 to 4 employees, etc., etc. Just the extra fields required for me to sign up for a Newegg Business account, because Newegg accounts don't automatically carry over to Newegg Business, and this was a Newegg Business only SKU. Fortunately, I was able to buy just one of them and not have to order a whole pallet or something like that. There usually are some catches with some of these business outlets, but I was able to pick this one up, and price-wise, it was sub 300. So it wasn't as low as eBay, but at least I wasn't taking the chances that I would take if I went the eBay route as well. Plus, I've been watching those eBay auctions for like $100, $150 for one of these things, get bid up to around the 300 mark or so. So I'm already a little ahead. I think once I add some graphics, like a 1050 Ti to this thing or something like that, yeah, I'm gonna say 1050 Ti, because Nvidia says it. But anyways, monkey see, monkey do, but I like to get official like that. But yeah, once I add one of those no additional power graphics cards in here, we can see what this thing can do. And also, I could always mod in the power supply from one of my other systems to basically allow for some additional power and stuff like that. Let's take a look at the inside. So here's what we have to play with here. Now, when you're dealing with big brand systems, you may run into some gotchas with proprietary stuff and things like that. I, for one, do not plan on ever upgrading the case of this thing because, well, it's a Dellasaurus. If it doesn't say Dell, I mean... but the good news is that because this is the tower version, it's probably the most standardized out of all the form factors that Dell sold in those days. We got a stock cooler, of course. This is probably not overclockable. It's old school business CPU and things like that. The 4 gigs of RAM is across 4 sticks, so 4 1 gig sticks. Depending on what's compatible, this is either going to end up with the 16 gigs from Tuxedo or the 8 gigs originally from Tuxedo. That's actually the question that I want to answer through this testing before I go getting really cinematic with this system, is where does this stand in terms of, could this be my new secondary system? Or does Tuxedo retain the crown with its overclocking and its brand new motherboard? We shall see. The power supply, strangely enough, is 80 plus gold certified. So if I can get a graphics card in here that can handle this processor properly and doesn't require additional power, I would actually like to run this thing into the ground before bringing in any aftermarket stuff. Fortunately, my 2005 system has my old no additional power Radeon card from a few years ago that I could probably put in here to get some entry-level graphics performance. But the real graphics card for this thing, should it become my new secondary system, 1050 Ti, not even up for discussion. That is the card for this thing. It does have, interestingly enough, 2 PCI Expresses in here, but I don't really want to do dual graphics cards or anything. There is an old PCI slot and there's a PCI Express 1.0, but unfortunately the graphics card is going to cover up the 1.0 and it's going to be, this will be too close to the cooler, too close to the cooler on it, so I have no interest whatsoever in ever having anything in any of the expansion slots. So yeah, this is a distant ancestor of Monolith. It's just going gray. No, that's the original color. It was originally made for Windows 7 though. We do have a proprietary slide cage thingy with plastic nonetheless over here for the hard drive, which I believe is a 250 gig Seagate Barracuda 7200 250 gig. I actually have another one of these things, except this one came out of an is that an HP? No, that's not. That's an HP. It's an HD. Okay, where's the date code? Oh, look, 11451. This is probably the original hard drive that came with it, for all I know. For some reason, this thing takes upside down drives. Yippee skippy. But the good news is the wiring is all set for a second drive and stuff like that. For now, though, we're going to run this thing full stock with no graphics card, 4 gigs of RAM, and this terrible mechanical drive, just to see how exactly this thing was running before it left the office. If it's anything at all like the machines, like the Sandy Bridge Dells that we still use at the 9 to 5, I imagine whoever had this probably was like, my computer's slow! But it was slow, quote unquote, because it was running off of the original mechanical drive and that thing was just getting worn out. So, DVD multi-burner, this is a $20 drive anyways, nothing exciting, but there's a couple of these going around the refurb circuit that don't actually come with drives, because the refurbisher yanked the drives to put them in one of their more expensive refurbs that they're trying to make more markup off of. I also have taken the liberties already of converting this thing to felt pads on the bottom so it can join the fuzzy bottom computer club. We have our microphone and thing. This is a business computer, so it's gonna have really basic stuff on it. Got the little button up there, but no USB 3 support. This just shows one of the classic problems. This right here just shows one of the classic, all these ports, but they're all 2s. Plug a lot of 2s in, plug a lot of thumbsticks into them or hubs or something, but they're all 2s, no 3s, which makes no sense because this machine is circa 2011. Tuxedo was a real, yeah, it's also a scratch indent. Look at that. At least it was nice and polished up. It's got a couple of scratches, so maybe it was scratch indent stock, which is why it was under 300. Maybe there's some in better condition that are in the mid to high 3s like I've been seeing elsewhere. But yeah, so here's the thing. Tuxedo is a 2010 machine. The processor
was made to handle 2010's Core i7, which was the original generation. Yes.
And yeah, so that had USB 3 on the motherboard. This thing only had USB 3 through an add-on card that you could order from Dell. I see what you did there, Dell. Then again, we are dealing with businesses. Businesses are kind of like mainstream customers. They don't really get as enthusiastic about what they can plug into their computer or what they can do with their computer as, say, someone like myself or whatnot. By the way, for those of you that have been looking at these things online, That is not a 120 millimeter fan. I think it's closer to a 92, which makes this thing, I think it is a 92, which makes this thing a good candidate for a fan controller, because this is easily now the system where the hum that you hear while it runs is the most noticeable. I also am not so sure about the motherboard wiggling a bit like this. I'll have to check the support mounts and things like that. One very important thing as we look at the built-in stuff on this thing, if you mess around with a decommissioned business computer, get a DisplayPort adapter, because DisplayPort showed up in business computers long before HDMI. I see the same thing at the 9 to 5. Businesses have, for some strange reason, DisplayPort on their computers. They had it on the computers long before HDMI became a thing. Let's plug this thing in, turn it on, and take it for a test drive. Okay, so the fun part about this Dellasaurus is that it's relatively small, and it's also rather light, because it is an OEM system, and of course the whole reduction in materials thing to keep costs down and be better for the environment, or something like that. I was reading some of Dell's marketing material from 2011 before I started recording this, as you can imagine. We are drawing less than a watt standby power, which I think is on par with what Monolith does. Let's power on the monster. So it doesn't have a problem that I routinely run into with these things, where it will turn on, then off, and back on again like 5 seconds later. And you know, we just missed the Dell screen. Right, then we'll let it boot into Windows 10 and type the password and everything. See here? I don't intend on keeping this like this, though. There's our multi-optical drive thingamawhatsit. So I'm going to load this thing up, and keep an eye on that blue cylinder, the hard drive light. This thing runs off a mechanical drive. $10 says this thing is going to churn and churn and churn for the first couple of minutes while it's on, even though there's barely anything on it. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes and the drive has finally stopped grinding. This is why I have no intention of keeping it mechanical for very long. Crystal disk mark on the hard drive that came with this thing. Let's see how terrible the numbers are. Not bad. Standard mechanical fare. I've seen mechanical drives go as low as 70 megs a second maximum sequential read and write. So this is actually better than some other horrible mechanical drives, but it's still a horrible mechanical drive. Here's Unigine Valley. 720p, low mode, 5 to 10 frames per second. And that should surprise absolutely no one, with a Sandy Bridge's integrated graphics. Actually, let's check how the processor's doing with the kilowatt before we stop torturing this thing. Compared to the i3 Haswell in that Lenovo system that I put together for Dad last year, this is actually more power efficient. With no graphics card, it was what, 30 to 60 watts most of the time? This thing's more along the lines of 20-something to 50-something. Now, for a little bit of roller vision and where the rubber meets the road. i7 2600, 3.4 gigahertz base speed. I think it turbos up to like 3.7, 3.8 or something like that. 4 gig system RAM, Intel HD graphics. I'm mostly curious about how the processor does. I think this is going to take Tuxedo's place as my new secondary system. 80. Oh man, I think Monolith can do better than this in power save mode. There we go. Right there. This is why I wanted to do this. Nova Bench 935 with no graphics card. The RAM, who cares? The processor, 753 for a non-K i7 Sandy Bridge, circa the beginning of this decade. Now, with Tuxedo and the 1090T, without any overclocking, it hits the high 5s. It can overclock up into the low 6s. This thing is in the mid 7s. And it's more power efficient, which is one of the various reasons why Intel has crushed AMD up until the release of the Ryzen. Next up, user benchmark. Let's see what ships I get. Ah, so it can go higher than the i3 on Dad's system from last year. Now it's approaching the 100 watt mark. So it can rip roar, but it drops way the heck down when it doesn't have anything exciting to do. Tree trunk, yacht, surfboard. Yacht. So this is basically what it could do in its office days. Now it's time to trick this thing out. 2600, baby. Hey, yeah, the Atari processor. No power graphics card is in. That might have been a Freudian slip. Now this is resembling something that's a little bit more hack job. Specifically down here. Got the terabyte noisy drive from Tuxedo in here to have all the games and stuff. And then the SSD is loose. However, they're so light and they're not prone to mechanical shock or anything, so basically what I'm using is I'm using the spare parts bag. I'm just fluffing up the SSD with the spare parts bag. Between the cables and everything else, that thing's not going anywhere, probably even doing much rattling for all I know. So, anyways. So, yeah, there actually are blue plastic caddies available that I can pick up if I want one more for this case, which that's very much an option at this point if I don't just want to fluff up the SSD indefinitely. This is lacking in terms of mounting and whatnot, largely due to the Dell power supply and the short cable lengths. Can't exactly jam an SSD here when the cable stops there. So, it has its shortcomings, but this is a big brand system, so we would be expecting some kind of gotchas and proprietary nonsense and stuff like that. The Dellasaurus now has 16 gigs of RAM, because the old stuff originally from Tuxedo doesn't seem to want to work in this board. So yeah, okay, well it maxes out at 16 gigs anyway, so the RAM is maxed, it has heat spreaders, and it's made for 1866 and the board only goes up to 1333. I don't think we'll have to worry about the memory for some strange reason. And just like that, it's now Saturday morning. I left the big downloads going on this thing and it basically did all of them and then put itself to sleep. It's interesting, if you poke around in the BIOS in this thing, there actually is a couple of corporate options like where is your image server. You can actually program this thing to automatically turn itself on every day at a certain time, or even every weekday at a certain time. With that in mind, since the graphics card is rubbish, it's basically just not integrated graphics, let's revisit Unigine Valley in low mode. Remember last time we got 5 to 10 frames a second, with very similar settings, DirectX 9 and the whole 9 yards. What are we up to just by putting any graphics card in there at all? Woefully outdated or not. Well, it actually looks like a console frame rate on a very crappy console. There we are, 20 something. I think under the right circumstances we could approach 30 frames a second. But the cool part is it doesn't look like a slideshow anymore. This is low mode with no anti-aliasing at 1080p. So yeah, we're flirting with 30 frames a second even though the graphics card is woefully outdated. Let's drop this down to 720p, which might be a little bit more contemporary to the consoles of this graphics card's day. 720p low mode. This is now an answer to the Xbox 360, and we are solidly in the 30 to 60 range. So I imagine when we go 1050, this is getting held back by the graphics card, no questions asked. There's not a doubt in my mind that when this finishes, that when we get this up to a 1050 Ti, we'll get far better results. But at least the animations are smooth, even if the graphics look blocky. Nova Bench time. Another thing that is a reason why I'm not keeping this graphics card. It's outdated in the sense that HDMI audio was an afterthought back then. So basically what happens is every time the system plays a sound, it flips the encoding on and off in real time. So if you're going to an AV receiver or something like that, or some kind of external sound processor, you lose the first half second of every sound that the system plays. That doesn't happen on newer cards. Alright, so now we're up to 800 something frames a second with this horrible graphics card from way too long ago. But it's better than the under 100 we were getting earlier. See what kind of numbers we get. Just gonna try it. It's gonna try the SSD, obviously, for write speed and things like that. And 1291. We are already almost up to where Tuxedo got up to, minus overclocking. And we still have a ways to go, because the processor is still in the 750s. It's just the graphics that are holding everything back. Get a 1050 Ti in this thing, and we will definitely revisit everything. Here's our user benchmark results. What ships are we up to now? No more yacht, 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 yacht. Surfboard, gunboat, speedboat. Notice how these two are looking a little better now that they're not getting choked by integrated graphics, and the processor is free to do more actual processing. It's only going to get better when we actually get an appropriate graphics card for that Sandy Bridge. this woefully outdated thing isn't going to foot the bill. So yeah, it's almost not even worth it to benchmark this thing, or do anything intelligent with it right now. I might try a few games on it, just to see how much things get better when I finally do get something that's worthy of this processor in there, but it's already looking better just from even getting off of integrated graphics. Just for fun, here's the crew in 1080p low mode. Needless to say, it chokes. 20 frames per second. Let's pretend this thing's a 360 then, or go last gen, which is what this card is contemporary to. By the way, the frame limiter is set to 60 and the VSync is off, and even in low mode it can't handle it. Let's go all the way down to 720p. Alright, 720p and bigger numbers. We at least hit 30 at this level. Yep, we can get up to 30 and it looks totally horrible. Yeah. This is all the graphics card, by the way. This shows just how long ago this was. Oh man. You don't notice, you see, the thing about technology is that it's transparent when it does its job the best. You don't notice when technology's doing its job, only when it isn't. So in the case of graphics cards, you don't notice how quietly your graphics hardware is aging, because it's just doing its job day after day until you finally pick up something else. But yeah, this looks and plays horrible compared to Monolith, but it's not because of the processor. So, in terms of passing the torch Dellasaurus-wise, I think we've succeeded here, but the story obviously isn't over yet. I want to get one of those 1050 Tis to put in this thing to give it some graphical horsepower so we can move beyond that woefully outdated Radeon from years and years ago. I could upgrade the power supply to something that actually has additional power connectors and put the 1060 in here, but I would rather embrace the unique challenges of converting a system like this rather than bypass them. I know how to bypass them, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this know how to bypass them, but in terms of working with what you have, especially with an 80 plus gold power supply as stock in this system, I am very curious as to what we can do without taking the easy way out and just brute forcing it. So this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. This is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.